Hey, Family, it's Julie B. Deep Dives, and today I'm doing a super deep dive into Season 3, Episode 4 of From, There and Back Again. This episode was a wild ride with a riveting nighttime arrival in town, another monster ambush, a mind-blowing revelation from Victor, a jaw-dropping twist with Fatima and her demon baby, and much more. Please hit the like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with this. Another sadistic mind game from this fake Thomas voice on the phone. But this time it's poor Ethan who answers the call. There's no way that this is really some version of Thomas from another timeline or universe, in my opinion. I think that really becomes clear in this scene. First, the voice speaks in an earnest tone to Ethan, telling him that his mom will arrive on an ambulance and she needs his help, and he has to be brave. But when Jim takes the phone, the voice drops the act, and unlike last time when he called him Daddy, now the voice loses all pretense and calls him Jim. When Jim tells the voice to leave his children alone, it responds in a sinister tone, "They're not your children anymore." This is once again reminiscent of the voice on the radio. First it sounded like a normal person, but then it abruptly changed tone and said in a menacing voice, "Jim Matthews, your wife shouldn't be digging that hole, Jim." This tone change was so drastic that many fans thought it might even be two different voices, but I think it was the same one. And in both cases, fans have wondered if this voice is actually trying to help. It did tell Jim that his wife shouldn't be digging the hole, and indeed, that caused her to fall into the cave. But this didn't actually help. It actually resulted in Jim running into danger needlessly, trying to dig his wife out. And 3 people volunteered to help, then 2 of them lost their lives when the house caved in, presumably as punishment for Tabitha digging the hole. So that voice didn't really help at all. In episode 3 this season, the fake Thomas voice had claimed to want to help Jim at first, and warned him that his kids shouldn't be playing outside so close to dark. He ran off to find them, but they weren't in any danger. Even then, the voice's tone was so sinister, and it also blamed Jim for being presumed deceased at the time. Now it's more clear than ever that this is a malevolent entity playing mind games with Jim, and now Ethan. It was trying to convince Ethan to run outside after dark when the ambulance arrives, which could have been a death sentence. Later, Ethan does just that when the ambulance arrives with his mom. This is the second time this season that he foolishly runs outside at night, after going outside in episode 1 to try to save a goat. Luckily, Boyd and Jim are able to get Ethan to safety and convince him to stay inside, but that voice on the phone could have gotten him killed. It's important to note that this entity on the phone somehow knew that Tabitha would be arriving on the ambulance ahead of time. This was before it got to town. At that point, the ambulance was at the fallen tree, which I don't think is actually in Fromville, but rather in a liminal in-between state between our dimension and the Fromville dimension. Yet this entity on the phone already knew the ambulance was coming, and I suspect it was aware of this even before they entered this space with the tree. Even though Jim rips the phone off the wall, I wouldn't be surprised if it still rings or this nefarious voice finds another way to contact the Matthews as the season progresses. And I believe the source is the same as the voice on the radio. I don't believe we're dealing with normal humans here talking to them. It's some kind of entity playing a parlor trick with these voices, kind of like the voices talking to Sarah in her head. They're not real people, at least not people who are alive. Moving on, the much-awaited, anticipated Tabitha arrival. Checking in with her, the ambulance has officially brought her back to Fromville, and as I expected, Henry is along for the ride too, Victor's father. We see a new fallen tree, different from the previous ones. Every time someone sees the fallen tree, it is a different tree and a different road. But the same scenario unfolds. They lose contact on their radio to the hospital. just like Julie had lost cell reception when the Matthews reached the tree in the season 1 premiere. They all get out of the ambulance and a murder of crows swarm above, just on the other side of the fallen tree. We even get a point of view shot from the crow's perspective looking down at the ambulance, which is extremely reminiscent of the shot of the crow looking down at the Matthews RV in the first episode of the series. I've always thought that these shots are designed so that we associate the crows with the big bad entity that's watching them all the time, wherever they are. I was hoping that Tabitha would run over the fallen tree, which we've never seen anyone try, and you never know, it could be a way of avoiding getting stuck in Fromville. Until someone tries it, we can't know for sure. But the swarm of crows is always on the other side of that fallen tree, almost as if they're trying to scare people away from crossing over the tree. The ambulance shows up in town at night by this point, and we have another brilliant ambush tactic by the monsters. But interestingly, before the ambulance arrives, Randall and Boyd are on the bus, as Boyd wants to watch the monsters to gear up for his plan to catch one. Randall notes that the monsters have a pattern of behavior every night that he's been observing, but tonight they're nowhere to be seen. This means that the monsters also knew the ambulance would be coming ahead of time, just like the fake Thomas entity on the phone. I believe that they're part of the same evil entity, the monsters and the voice. This entity has an omniscient awareness of everything everyone says and does in Fromville, wherever they are, even in the middle of the woods, as we've seen. And now we have evidence that it also has foreknowledge of who will be arriving, because as many of us have theorized, there's an entity here that's responsible for targeting specific people into Fromville. Randall tells Boyd that everyone here is so afraid of dying, but he thinks there are worse fates than that, and makes a reference to the things he saw while in the cicada coma in season 2. But he doesn't elaborate on what that is or if he remembers it clearly. They're interrupted when the ambulance shows up and they run out to help. Once again, the monsters' tactics are evolving. First we saw the ambush with the livestock in episode 1, and now they stage another ambush with this ambulance. They deviate from their usual nightly habits, as Randall had pointed out, and the female monster here lays down in the road, pretending to be injured to lure the EMTs out of the ambulance. Of course, none of them believe Tabitha when she warns them that that's not a person in the street. The new cop Acosta handcuffs Tabitha, who's frantic, and this was just unnecessary as she is not a criminal. The female creature here transforms and murders both the EMTs, as Acosta unsuccessfully tries shooting at that monster and several others who appear. Then she simply abandons the handcuffed Tabitha and Henry, running up to Colony House. She even shoots at monsters who haven't even transformed or done anything yet. And she's so careless that she shoots at a monster right in front of a Colony House window, but the bullet misses, and Colony House resident Nikki is hit inside. This character Acosta is described as a rookie cop, and that's certainly evident from her incompetent and reckless conduct. Moving on, Victor and Sarah are having a sleepover in a blanket fort, which is a safe space for Victor as he tries to recover lost memories that are traumatic for him. He explains that he chose to share this with Sarah because she's the scariest person in town, so she won't be scared and he doesn't want to do this alone. It's actually great to see these two communicating, two of the people who are the most tapped into this place. Victor talks about the aftermath of the 1978 massacre, when he was left as the sole survivor, and we get a new flashback here. As he tells Sarah he's friends with the boy in white, and Sarah is surprised to hear he's seen the boy in white too. Victor shows her what he dug up in the previous episode, a suitcase full of relics that he gathered from each deceased person after the total massacre of 1978. The boy in white told him to bury these to honor them because he couldn't bury the bodies. But I think there's an ulterior motive here. Some fans have theorized that personal objects could be used as anchors or so-called port keys that, under the right circumstances, could possibly enable someone to travel to where that person came from, out of this place, by going through a faraway tree or the lighthouse portal. For instance, Tabitha was pushed out the lighthouse window with Victor's lunchbox, and she landed within walking distance of Victor's father's house. Now, the odds of that happening by chance are slim, so it's possible that these relics could also enable a person to travel to where their former owners came from, and the boy in white wanted these items to be saved for that purpose. Incidentally, it's still unclear who buried these bodies, since little Victor definitely couldn't, as he said. Did they just lay there for years? Victor realizes to his surprise that there's no relic for Christopher here, which could mean that Christopher is still alive out there, but he'd be a bit too old, so it's not that likely. The Victor's surprise at the fact that there's no relic for Christopher makes me think that he knows Christopher is deceased, so there should be a relic of his. Thinking about Christopher triggers him, and he goes straight into a panic attack, triggered by the memory of what's missing that he's been trying to dredge up. This piece that's missing from his memories, it turns out that it's Christopher's ventriloquist dummy named Jasper. Many of us in the fandom predicted that this dummy belonged to Christopher, and now this theory is confirmed. Victor shares that Christopher used to make people laugh, and he entertained him with the dummy. But then Christopher started seeing the symbol, and he changed. He became scary, according to Victor. He started spending more and more time alone, which actually parallels what's happening to Jade. Starting in season 2, Jade moved into the bar by himself as he became more and more obsessed with the symbol, and his visions continued. Now, this was an incredible mind-bending moment. Victor recalls finding Christopher and the dummy arguing with each other. He saw the dummy move and talk on its own as Christopher looked increasingly upset and argued with it. Now, I believe this dummy is trying to convince Christopher to facilitate the massacre of 1978, as I've always believed that he did. I believe that Christopher likely revealed everyone's hiding places to the monsters, since he couldn't have ripped them to pieces all by himself in the way we've seen in flashbacks. This is truly a Twilight Zone-inspired plot twist. It echoes a classic episode in which the puppeteer becomes the puppet, after the puppet comes to life in what would become a popular horror trope. Similarly, I think that an evil spirit possessed this dummy and used Christopher as a kind of puppet. Jade, in season 2, saw a vision of this dummy in which the dummy screamed at him, the same scream as a man under a boulder that Jade had seen in a vision earlier. He later saw the dummy in the cave in the season 2 finale. Now, I always viewed this as a sign that an evil spirit or entity wants to use Jade as its puppet, manipulate him into triggering another massacre, like I believe it did with Christopher. And this new scene with Christopher and Jasper makes me even more convinced of this theory. But moving on, after Acosta abandons Tabitha and Henry, Boyd and Randall run outside to help, as does Jim. They don't have the keys to get Tabitha out of the handcuffs, though, so Randall takes off to get tools from the bus. He's clearly been on a redemption arc and has shown a willingness to help in a crisis before. Unfortunately, the monsters are waiting for him when he returns. He throws Boyd the bag of tools and holds out a talisman in his hand. But one of the monsters tells him that's not how they work. We already knew that the talismans must be hung up inside a closed structure, but it's interesting to hear a monster state that they have an awareness about this. After seeing Randall writhing on the ground like this in the trailer, I believed that an evil entity would remote trigger the sensation of the invisible cicadas because Randall is outside trying to help people. And indeed, that's exactly what happens here. As Boyd searches for the ambulance keys, the waitress creature holds them out, saying, "You can't save them all. Looking for these? We get to keep Randall, though." Boyd is forced to make a terrible choice, very much like the trolley problem in philosophy. To save a group of people, he has to allow harm to come to one person. And Boyd does the only thing that he could do, really. Take the keys and leave Randall behind to save Tabitha, Jim, and Henry. If he had tried to run over the monsters instead and try to save Randall that way, he would have just run over Randall too, because they were in a tight circle around him. This statement, "you can't save them all," has eerie significance because it applies not only to this moment, but for the rest of this series. The town is sure to lose many more people before it's all over, and as much as Boyd wants to save everyone and lead them all home, he won't be able to. Ever since Boyd first arrived in town, from the moment he got there, he's been a Christ-like figure. And when he first arrived, he even saw that the barn was painted with the words, "Save us." Ever since then, he's carried this burden on his shoulders. But it simply won't be possible to save everyone. And this savior complex of his will continue to be exploited by the monsters and used as an effort to break him. They've already done this twice now this season, with the ambush and murder of Tian Shen in front of him, and now with this no-win situation and this choice that they forced him to make with Randall. Boyd was in the military for like 30 years, and so he's committed to the motto of "leave no man behind." But they put him in a situation in which he had no other choice. But this will still come back to haunt him. Perhaps it will haunt him in more ways than one, because the statement, "we get to keep Randall now," from the monsters, could mean more than it seems on the surface. Because instead of murdering Randall, it's possible that they could have done something else to him, maybe even turned him into a monster. But more on that in a bit. Back at Colony House, Marielle extracted the bullet successfully from Nikki, but she's ultimately unable to save her as she is bleeding internally and starts coughing up blood. Acosta gets them to let her inside and starts freaking out about how none of this can be real. And when Jim and Tabitha arrive, everyone is stunned to see her back alive. Elsewhere, Elgen has yet another vision of this kimono lady, but first, this time, he's fully awake, a waking dream. He's sitting with Tilly, who is appearing more and more suspect once again. This is the second time she's been present for one of Elgen's mysterious kimono lady visions. Last time he had a vision of her, he nodded off, and Tilly was next to him as he dreamed of the mystery kimono lady. Prior to this, in Season 2, Elgen dreamed of this lady while in the bathtub. It appeared as if she was trying to drown him by pushing him under the water. But it's possible that she was just trying to wake him up, because the infamous music box was there in his dream. Maybe she actually saved him from some kind of harm from the music box entity. And in this vision, from this season, the kimono lady put her hands on his face and didn't really seem threatening at all, despite her terrifying appearance. Now we have Elgen saying, "Am I awake?" as he sees the lady appear to him. This is the first time he's had a waking dream of her. She turns away and he follows her. Then she turns back to him, reaches out her hands and says, "Help me, please." So now I don't think she's actually a threat at all. She could be possibly the spirit of someone who drowned here, given her wet appearance. Some fans still believe that it's a future version of Fatima because it looked more like her in season 2, and Fatima is definitely not doing well this season. But I don't think this makes sense anymore, personally, for this to be her. For this season, the show cast a Chinese actress to play the part, and she's wearing a kind of kimono-looking thing. Definitely not the type Fatima wears. It could be like a different type of kimono that's of Chinese origin, since the actress is Chinese who plays this part. Now, moving on, I have to point this out because this was trippy. Early in this episode, Nikki had been cleaning blood off the wall when the kamikaze crow had flown in during the previous episode. And Bacta said that she's not going to touch that crow, that it's bad juju. And we know now that Nikki ends up losing her life in the very same episode. So it begs the question, was Bacta right? And this was bad juju handling that deceased crow? And that led to Nikki's demise? If that's the case, we should also consider that Bacta told Tilly she shouldn't be reading tarot cards in a place like this. So that could be foreshadowing of something to come with that and Fatima. We'll have to wait and see. Meanwhile, Boyd tries to drag Acosta over to face what she's done, much as he did to Frank in season 1 after his family was murdered. And his extreme reaction once again feels like projection of his own guilt. Boyd feels guilty for leaving Randall behind. And with Frank, in season 1, he had said, a man protects his family. And that was projection too, because Boyd was carrying the guilt of feeling that he failed to protect his own family, leading to Abby's massacre of some townspeople and Boyd being forced to shoot her. Now, in a surprising scene, Donna insists that Boyd come with her to speak privately, but instead of ranting at him for his actions, she breaks down in a way that we've never seen her do before. She's sobbing and asking, why can't they leave us alone? This place isn't just trying to break Boyd, remember. It's trying to break everyone, just Boyd most of all. We're seeing characters being pushed closer and closer to that breaking point. Even someone as tough as Donna. I have to note, here we have yet another instance of a mirror being prominently featured. Donna breaks down in front of a mirror, just as Boyd screamed in front of a mirror in season 1. And it's fitting, in my opinion, because I believe Fromland is a mirror dimension, a place that mirrors our own dimension, a theory that I had discussed last week in my video on Tabitha, and this is a theory I'll discuss further in an upcoming video. For instance, Fromland contains mountains next to a lighthouse, and Tabitha just so happened to be pushed out into Camden, Maine, where there are mountains right on the coast, a rare thing in the U.S. Even the houses are similar to Fromville in Camden, simple colonial houses with similar primary colors. So it's fitting that Boyd and now Donna would emotionally break down in front of mirrors, because this mirror dimension is the source of their torment, in my opinion. Also, mirrors are symbolic of deception, and the theme of deception and appearance versus reality is omnipresent in this show. Things are rarely as they seem, as the song in the season 2 trailer goes. So we see prominent shots with mirrors, such as this one of Jasmine Monster from season 1. And Fatima here, in front of the same mirror. Even the shots of the two of them mirror each other. But moving on, out of the cabins, Jade actually opened up to Kenny and Christy, telling them about his disturbing visions. Between this scene and Victor sharing information with Sarah in this episode, it's refreshing to see characters really communicating vital information to each other at last. Now, many of us expected some mayhem to ensue at the cabins that night after Jade knocked over one of the totems in the previous episode. But all that happens here is just some knocking on the outside of the cabin, similar to the footsteps and noises that Kenny and Jim heard in episode 1. They're literally not out of the woods yet, but I predict that whatever evil they unleashed out there won't become apparent right away. In a similar vein, there's more communication going on here as well. Julie tells Ethan that when she was in the cicada coma, she remembers being more scared than she's ever been in her life, but she can't remember all of her experience. We haven't seen if she will have similar after effects as Randall with his invisible cicadas attacking him, but part of this entity seems to still be with Julie, as she herself remarked in episode 1. She feels like it's gotten into her head. And I'm sure Marielle will have similar after effects, the other person who was chosen for that cicada coma. Now back at Colony House, here's a disturbing development with Fatima and her quote-unquote demon baby, as we like to call it. She goes into a room where Nikki's body is and closes the door, then proceeds to stick her fingers into Nikki's gunshot wound and lick the blood off her fingers. She's hesitant at first, but once she gets a taste, she goes for more and more. This goes way beyond just eating rotten vegetables like she's been doing. Now she's venturing into cannibalism territory. She could even start to crave human flesh now, not just blood. We've seen clues that this place dates back at least as far as the Puritan era. There were scenes of Tabitha looking at Miranda's paintings of Puritans. Here's one right here. And Jade also saw a vision of a Puritan. This is a Puritan woman, at least she appears to be, in one of Miranda's paintings that Tabitha saw in Victor's dad's basement. Here's Jade's Puritan that he saw in episode 3. We keep seeing these references, so I did some digging and came up with a quote from the Puritan era that seems relevant here. There was a woman who was condemned to die in Salem during the witch hunts, and her name was Sarah Good. She cursed a judge before her execution by saying, "God will give you blood to drink." This actually inspired Nathaniel Hawthorne to use the same line in The House of Seven Gables. It was used to curse a Puritan man whose entire family line of descendants were also cursed after that. Now, in episode 3, Jade knocked over a totem, which may have been warding off some type of evil, and he also urinated on a tree. And the show made a peculiar choice of showing this, which I think was meant to imply that he's defiling sacred ground. This forest seems to be sentient and doesn't want to be disturbed. In season 1, the boy in white even told Sarah that the forest was angry now, or this place is angry now. It does seem like it's some type of sentient thing. This actual forest is alive in some way. Now, right after Jade did this, he had the vision of the Puritan tethered to a tree with a spike through his eye, who then started choking him. Then right after Jade knocked over a totem, he saw this vision of the Puritan drinking from a skull. And of course, he's drinking blood. Then he holds it out like he's offering it to Jade to drink the blood as well. I see this as akin to a curse, just like the line, "God will give you blood to drink." Then in the very next episode, Nikki actually dies spitting up blood, and Fatima all of a sudden goes from eating rotten vegetables to drinking blood. So it's possible that instead of bringing a new entity back with them, like Boyd brought the cicada entity, Jade and his group just caused this entity inside Fatima to grow stronger, now craving human blood instead of just rotten vegetables. I don't think Fatima will survive this in the end this season, and a new entity will likely be unleashed by using her as a vessel. Now, closing out the episode, Boyd and Donna look out the window and see, to their shock, the monsters have brought Randall there and left him on the hood of the ambulance, his cheek bleeding profusely. He turns his head to look ominously at Boyd, and given what the waitress monster said to Boyd, we get to keep Randall, though. I have to wonder if she meant that metaphorically in some type of way. Perhaps Randall will become a monster himself now, but it won't be readily apparent. If you think about it, a monster could easily walk amongst them and no one would even know unless they reveal it themselves. So it's possible this could happen to Randall. We still don't know how the monsters are actually created. I've been thinking that they were likely pulled from a nightmare, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see. And take a look at this. If you look closely, next to Randall on the hood of the ambulance, next to his leg, there's a blood stain, which appears to be very much like the red Cthulhu type of squid monster that was part of the cave drawing in season 2. My friend Robert Saunders pointed this out, and it makes me even more suspicious that Randall is now part of the evil entity somehow, whether he's turning into a monster or whether he's just got part of an evil entity inside of himself, perhaps still via the cicada entity that continues to torment him. One thing's for sure. After Boyd left Randall behind with the monsters, I think the chip on his shoulder will be bigger than ever. Now, I want to know what you guys think. Do you think Fatima's pregnancy is really just another evil entity inside her? Or do you think she's turning into a monster herself? What will happen with Randall now? And what do you think is going on with Jasper the dummy? Is he possessed by an evil spirit? Let me know your thoughts and theories on this episode in the comments. And if you enjoy this video, please leave a like and subscribe. And until next time, keep on deep diving and let's see what we can uncover together.